All right. Good morning, everybody. So I'm John DiMaggio. I am the Chief Security Strategist at Analyst One. This is where I'm supposed to give you all my professional accolades, and I'll give you a few, but I like the more personal approach. I say I do cyber thingies because today, when it comes to being, a researcher or a defender or a threat hunter, we're constantly changing what we do. I've been doing this for a long time. I do a little bit of everything. It feels like every so many years I seem to reinvent myself. For example, I started out as a network engineer, and this was my hobby. Was doing OSINT, started a blog, writing stuff, and I was fortunate enough for this to become my full-time job. Because of that, though, my work's my passion, which really what that means is I work a lot because it's hard to turn off when you love what you do. I publish all my research for free. There's no paywalls. Everything is available through Analyst One. That is a great thing because we used to have that was a regular, and now most organizations you have to pay for their threat intelligence, which I get, but I like to give back to the community, and I'm fortunate enough that Analyst One lets me do that. I spend a lot of my time these days, as I said, doing cyber thingies. But as far as reinventing myself, when I started doing ransomware, I realized every victim has to talk to bad guys, and why shouldn't we as researchers? So I talk to a lot of criminals, a lot of people, including my mother, who worries about me constantly, tell me that I shouldn't. But I've had a lot of success, and done well, you learn a lot of information. As Ryan already said, I have a book, very proud of. It won some awards, and I have Ransomware Diaries, which is my baby. I love doing research and writing, and I have complete creative freedom, and Analyst One lets me do crazy things that most companies wouldn't let me to do. So just a shout out to them for allowing me to go the path that I've gone to have success and to write really interesting research. Obviously, I'm a little biased. All right, so today we are here to talk about the Ransomware Diaries. If you haven't read it, please do. They are lengthy. They usually take me 3 to 6 months of research and writing to complete. One of the things about the Ransomware Diaries that we always do is an audio recording. And we do that because they're so lengthy. You don't get to see the images, but you do get to hear me read you a bedtime story if you're interested. So with the exception of the Ransomware Diaries 5, because it was rushed to come out due to real world events that were going on, everything else has an audio recording, and we'll get that one out soon. But today we're going to go through, we're going to talk about what the Ransomware Diaries is. We're going to get into some of the tactics and methods behind the scenes that I use in order to develop my research and identify findings. We'll go through the investigation cycle that I use. I'll talk about collection, what I collect, why I collect it, tips and tricks around that. And the interesting stuff, well, to me, the threat actor engagements. And then we'll go through some examples showing some of the successes and failures of some of those engagements. And then we'll wrap it up at the end. In case you haven't figured out what's to take away from this, I'll tell you. So on that note, what is the Ransomware Diaries? Well, I have right now, like I said, there's 5 of them out there. These are not your normal CTI reports. I've had a whole career of doing that. I was a long time intelligence analyst. I was a SIGINT analyst for the government. I worked at Symantec doing nation state work. So I've done my fair share of traditional intelligence work within the CTI space. This is not quite that. I've taken what I think are the valuable assets and things that I've learned from doing intelligence work and writing, and I added in both a little bit of storytelling to it. I love to tell a good story, and while that may not be the important part for what's delivered through the information, it's the most important part to me because we read so many regular CTI reports, which are important and need to be there, but I like to entertain people as well. So because I get so much of the human part of the story when I do this work, it really allows me to have an interesting take on things, and I just enjoy telling the story. So right now there's, like I said, 5 of them. When I said that I've creative freedom with this, I mean, that's down to the graphics within it, how I want to have the layout, different heading and section titles. You'll notice sometimes I often will reference 90s rap music, just goes with my age, but I'll throw in some pop culture things. Like I have little hidden things in there. I wrote one of my reports, I changed the the countdown timer to only have the numbers that are from the TV show Lost. Like there's lots of little hidden nuggets most people never catch. I'm a dork. I like to put stuff like that in there, but if you go look for them, you'll find them. So I haven't always done the ransomware diaries. I started a couple years ago. But before I did that, I had very similar reporting, meaning the style, where there were in-depth, long-term research. If you go back and look at these, you kind of can see the progression of where I really started to get comfortable and began talking to threat actors and doing using sock puppets and doing human engagements and things of that nature. What I found as I was writing these is I didn't have a way to sort of connect one report to the other, and they don't always connect, but a lot of times there's a common thread, and that's especially so when you start developing relationships with threat actors. More importantly, I'm not a marketing guy, but I needed a way to have sort of a branding around it or a name around it so that people would know what it is. So every time I write a report, I'm not starting over. So this is kind of what led me to develop the Ransomware Diaries, is I wanted to have a series. Every one of my reports, that I've done so far, all have some sort of information that shows how I went from the last one to the current one. It won't always be like this. Right now, 4 of the 5 have been related in some way to Lockbit, and that's because I go where the story goes, and I just got really close with a lot of the key players within the Lockbit ransomware group. But I did do one with a ransom VC, and moving forward, I got maybe one more with Lockbit, but that story is pretty much coming to an end. So you can expect that there'll be new projects. I don't know what they will be, but it will not always be Lockbit. But that's what a lot of it has been so far. All right, now normally this is locked away in a vault, so it's only going to be between me and the internet now. Everybody don't know the secret sauce. There's nothing really that secret here. This is what I use when I do my work. I am an OSINT guy. Now I am not a badass OSINT guy, but I do love collecting OSINT data, digging in and finding information. I always do that when I do my research to start. Additional, you don't want to rework something that's already been done, so it's already been done. So you want to know what other security vendors and researchers have written. So that's how I always begin. Attack data is very valuable. I unfortunately don't have a lot of it at Analyst One. I do get attack data, but it's usually through things, believe it or not, that are shared with me with threat actors, as well as other security researchers. I do work with both ransom negotiators, IR teams and things like that. And I usually will do the work for free with the benefit of I get some sort of data, or I get to use some of my experiences from that in my work. And then, of course, the obvious, if you've read the work, I do a lot of humans collection. And humans is something that's new to me within the past, 3 or 4 years. It's not something that I did in my previous life, but it is something that I have come to absolutely love. It's a rush. There's adrenaline. It's one of those things where when you first go into it, you don't know how things are going to go. You always plan as much as you can, but you never know what you're going to get. And I've actually developed really good relationships. Sounds strange, but with threat actors that they're human too. And that's really helped me to develop good intelligence and to tell a good story. The last thing I put in there is prepared with cyber threat intelligence analysis. What I mean by that is you may not get it when you read the Ransomware Diaries because it's so different than a lot of the stuff out there, but I am a very traditional intelligence analyst. If you look at my book, it's completely different than the Ransomware Diaries. It's literally like a CTI 101 for chasing advanced threats. I was a government guy, so I've done all the traditional intelligence training, and I'm a big believer in using threat models, analytical models, attribution models, and things of that nature, so that you're not making assumptions, you're not jumping the gun, or you're not putting out misinformation. One of the things I really dislike that we do in the world today is the take my word for it attribution. You should always qualify your attribution and never just expect people to take your word for it. So I try to do that with my work, but I think it's important to get back to the basics, even when you're doing something that's quite different than the norm with your work. So that's sort of my formula for the Ransomware Diaries. One of the areas I'm lacking, I think I've only done it in 1 or 2 of them, is providing IOCs. something I need to do more. But as I said earlier, I often don't have as large a pot of threat data and attack data as I would like. But when I do have those, I share those. So those are all the things basically that go into to what I produce that you read within the Ransomware Diaries. Okay, going back to what I said with models. So this is my high-level investigation cycle process. Basically, this helps you figure out the who, how, where, and the what. And we'll dive into this a little more detailed, but I collect, once I have some threat data, I profile my adversary, and that's part of my preparation to do an engagement. Then once I have all of my collected data, my profiling, and whatever I learned from my engagement, I do analysis. Then a very important step, I document my work. That's where I begin to write. And it's, like I said, they're very lengthy, but writing and documenting what you find is probably the most important step. One thing a lot of folks don't do that I learned the hard way is deconfliction. You don't want to interfere with a law enforcement investigation. So if you're putting out something that's new and unknown, especially if it's something that might be a little edgy, you want to make sure you do deconfliction. I once screwed up a law enforcement investigation. That's a story over a beer, but you don't want to be that guy. And then I publish my work. Cycle begins over, and I start again with the next piece of research. But the most important piece of this, which I never or very rarely hear talked about in CTI, is critical thinking. And I think that's really what I have, excelled at with the Ransomware Diaries, is that critical thinking aspect. That's where you connect the dots. And because I'm looking at very lengthy periods of time and looking at many attacks from different angles, both the threat data aspect and the human aspect, to include, talking to victims as well, connecting those dots with critical thinking is the most valuable part of this process. And it's something that I think we need to drive home more for traditional analysis as well when we do research. Okay, so I use some frameworks. Honestly, these are new. I just started using these within the past couple of months. I took a class, 4589 Cybercrime Intelligence. It's a SANS course. And I think it was day 4, I was in the class and they showed me this framework. And I was like, wow, this is great. This is something that's developed for human engagements. And there's 2 of them here, the disarm kill chain and the MITRE attack engagement. So they're both good, but I love the disarm kill chain. And I originally had this later in this presentation where I talk more about sock puppets. But what I found when I actually was done with the course and I actually went and started using this, what I found was by looking at this earlier in my life cycle of research, it made me think about other aspects of my research beyond the human piece that would help me to prepare as I went through and did the work. So I wanted to show this up front, but this is something that you can use that will really help you to think about what you're going to do, but it is essential for doing engagements and preparing, because it makes it very difficult to miss something if you actually look and go through all these steps. All right, so as I said earlier, I start out with data collection. Whether you're looking at OSINT information, or whether you're digging through OSINT, whether you're going through attack data, or whatever it might be, you have to know what you're doing. There's 2 types of collection that I do. There's passive and active. You can get yourself in trouble if you don't know what you're doing with active collection. So, just make sure you know what your tools that you're doing, how they're actually touching things and what they affect. Doing active is sort of like breaking into someone's house and having a look around, versus passive is where you're standing across the street looking through the window. One you can go to jail for, the other is just creepy. So know what you're doing. There could be legal consequences if hacking is illegal. So if you do something, even if you're unaware that you're breaking any laws, you could find yourself in trouble. You might also interfere with a law enforcement operation, meaning you give away to an adversary that this resource is now known, or worse, you give away that you're looking at something by poking around and you end up getting compromised by an adversary yourself. So be careful when you do data collection. Okay, so whenever I am going through attack data, when I'm doing my research, there are very specific things that you need to collect on. with this, I made this sort of model, which is based on what's important to me. You should change this to use for what you do, but this is sort of what I use when I go through for the research for the Ransomware Diaries. I wrote a paper on this a year or two ago. I realized after I wrote my book, I did a piece in the book about threat profiling, and I realized once I started doing the Ransomware Diaries, I realized we're missing a piece of this. Unlike when I used to track nation states, ransomware victims always have to talk to their attacker. That's something that was unheard of when I did nation state work. So because of that, I found that there were information gaps whenever I would do my profiling. So I created a new profiling model, if you will, and a collection model. Again, it's all free. I wrote a paper about it, and there's a couple different models and a use case in there, but it walks in more detail than what I'm going to talk about today. But this is what I do when I go through my collection phase for the Ransomware Diaries. And obviously threat data is something that's very important because it gives away a lot of clues and it helps you to fingerprint your adversary. When you're looking through attack data, telemetry is a great thing. It can literally tell you the entire story of that attack. You get to see exactly what your attacker did, what's important. Being able to sort of rebuild that life cycle attack gives you a lot of vital information. So I try to do that when I have this data, when I'm doing my research. And the reason that it's important for me to do that, whether it's the time, dates of the activity, whether it's looking at a malware or malware analysis report, or whether it's going through phishing emails and trying to see and find any novel or unique techniques that your adversary used, the reason that it's important is because you want to build an attack chain. So though I don't always publish this in the Ransomware Diaries, I always build out attack chains for whoever I'm profiling or whoever I'm researching. Now, with ransomware, you often have many different affiliates that do things differently, but usually about 80% of it's going to be the same. So I try to come up with sort of my baseline of what I see the most, and then I look for things that are very novel or unique. So I might end up with 2 or 3 attack chains. But the good thing about that is when I find something that's novel or unique, I can usually tie it to a specific affiliate team. And then whenever I see that in attacks, it's usually a good indication that that's who's behind it. While this isn't what we do at Analyst One, in past lives, what I would also do with this is use this to hand to defenders because, or incident response folks, because what you can do is, especially if an attack is still going on, it kind of gives you a map of where to look and gives you a heads up and can be a time saver. So there's lots of uses for this, but I use it personally, like I said, for my research. To sort of understand who I'm researching and to know what they do, not just from a human aspect, but from a technical aspect. All right, and then we get into the stuff that I think is a little more fun and interesting, but it could be just because I did the traditional CTI stuff for so long. But the where. First thing I do when I am looking at ransomware bad guys is figure out where they live. Most of these, or many of these guys, do spend time on forums on the dark web. So I want to identify those forums of interest. I want to know where they spend their time, and that's important. And I want to make sure I have access to those forums. So gaining access, identifying and gaining access are one of the steps that I do early on before I really dive into my research. Once I do that and I'm on those spaces, I need to identify the accounts of who I'm targeting. Now, it's not just the accounts of my target, but it's also who do they talk to? Who's important to them? What are the roles of those people? I didn't put my picture on this, just so you guys know. Lockbit used my picture on their profile after I wrote the Ransomware Diaries 1. But I captured that information. I didn't put it on here, but I also like to do. I'm big on visualizations, so I like to make visualizations as well. This is an old spreadsheet. I don't have to use spreadsheets today. Analyst One is software that I use instead. But if you don't have it, I put this here because not everybody has the same resources. But tracking who people are, what they do, what their role is to your target, it just gives you a bigger picture, and it helps you identify high value players that you also want to profile and target while you're doing your research. Or at least, again, that's what I do with the Ransomware Diaries in my process. Okay, so forum content collection, this says who. I should have made that what, because this is where you're looking at what they're talking about. Going through, and it's not always just to look for seeing where they're buying attack resources, though that's certainly something I do. I also like to look at who they talk to from an aspect of they don't get along with everybody. Usually there's a lot of high egos in ransomware. There's usually lots of drama. When I do human engagements, I can leverage that drama. So even though, and it's just fun to read, but even though it may not seem to be the most relevant at first, that's actually something that can be used and leveraged. So I go through, if they've been on the forum for years, I will go through every single post, read everything, figure out who they're talking to, what their role is, what the point of the conversation is, if they like each other, don't like each other. All those things are relevant to me. So that's what I do as far as the forums, and this could also be on Telegram. It doesn't just have to be forums. It depends where they live, but that information is usually gold. I find so much in there, but you have to read a lot of it. If you just read certain, it's like looking at attack data. If you just look at one attack versus many over a period of time, you're not going to see the bigger picture. It's the same when you go through forums. You want to look at those people and those relationships over time and see how they've changed and what the value is of the two talking to one another. So that's what I do. That's why it's important to be on the forums and identify what's relevant and what's not. All right, so beyond forums, most ransomware attackers have their own infrastructure, and that also has its own valuable information. Whether it's a data leak site or whether it's an admin panel, there's lots of different aspects. Lockbit was great for profiling because they not only had their data leak site, but they also had file sharing sites. Contact us. You had your affiliate rules. I at one point tried to I pretended to be an affiliate and I tried to join Lockbit. And while I didn't make it through, I learned a lot of information, and that's what got my foot in the door with Lockbit that I later built that relationship on. So there is a lot of good information that you can get by profiling the attacker-owned infrastructure. All right, so once I have that, I've gone through attack data, I've gone through the markets forums, Telegram channels, all that. I've looked at who's talking, who the high value players are, what they're talking about. Now I want to profile them. Again, often doesn't end up in my reports, but as part of my process, I write a threat profile, detail. Basically, I'm making a digital fingerprint of who my adversary is. You're doing sort of an evaluation of that adversary. And while you're going through this process, it makes sense to just grab the IOCs because you're often going to come across them when you're doing the collection. So, and billing or taxing. So all of that's important, but one of the biggest things that was missing from traditional threat profiles were the behavioral analysis aspect. And again, because we have to talk to bad guys when it comes to ransomware, it makes sense to do some sort of behavioral analysis. And that doesn't mean that I have a PhD in psychology and I'm breaking down, if their mother hugged them enough, though sometimes I do exactly that. But the main thing that my point of saying this is you want to know, the things that are important to them, the things that they don't like. All of this is going to later, we'll talk about more, be relevant when we do the engagement part of this. But, while ransomware is usually motivated by financial gain, there are other times where it's not, and it's important to identify that. Just as an example, when Mandiant put out that blog that Lockbit was working with EvilCorp, and they were partnering sort of as an affiliate because EvilCorp was sanctioned. The group Lockbit did not want them to be part of them. So they made up this whole story that they had compromised Mandy and put that out on their blog. Point being, it wasn't real, but if that was nothing to do with financial gain. So you can't always assume that because it's ransomware, it's financial gain. Well, 90%, 95% of the time it is. When it's not, there's usually an interesting story behind it. So just things to look at as you do your profiling. Oh, and the most important thing, make sure you do attribution well. Don't just attribute based off what you think it is. I used to remember doing nation state work, people would just assume things were China, and that was ridiculous. You need evidence to back your attribution, whether you use a model or some other framework. Make sure you actually have evidence-based attribution. And please, for the love of God, let's stop doing the take my word for it attribution that we see so much of today. All right, this is important when you're doing work that covers a large period of time. I get confused like everybody else. This is one way I help identify significant events, and I also identify patterns. I always build out a timeline before I start writing. I go through each sequence of events. I take even events like you see there, Wexford complaint. Those are things that are on the forums where another affiliate was putting in a complaint against Lockbit that he had ripped him off. All of those things, whether you consider them at the time to be important or not, are worth documenting in a timeline. Now, if you're going to publish it, the timeline, you might want to clean it up. But for research, for what, again, since this is about what goes into the ransomware diaries, this is what I do. I document everything, put it in a nice clean timeline. And then as I'm going through my research, it just helps me to piece things together and to stay on track. And I think that is one of the things when you're looking at a lot of data over a lengthy time that you get confused on easily. This will help you to not do that. All right, phase two, my favorite part of this, which is the threat actor engagement. So know before you go. So no better way no better term for threat actor engagements. You cannot prepare enough when you're going to do a threat actor engagement. Going back to some of those previous steps, just to highlight why they're important, when we're looking at the forums, markets, Telegram, whatever it might be, where these guys live and post and talk with other actors, buy resources, express their opinions, we need to capture that. You want to know your target's political, religious beliefs. You want to know their interests outside of ransomware. You want to know, even like their attack-related requirements, things that they buy or purchase. All of that can be used when you're actually talking to them and engaging with them. Many times, as I said earlier, these guys don't always get along. Knowing the opinion of your target versus a person or a group that they don't like is also important because you can leverage that to build rapport and things of that nature. If I know Lockbit, hates Black Cat and I'm talking to them, I can sort of leverage that. If I hate Black Cat too, or I'm pretending that I hate Black Cat too, that's going to be more of a bond than if I come in there and I'm talking about that Black Cat's the greatest ransomware group ever. That's going to piss off the leader of Lockbit. So knowing all that and how to leverage that, especially the political aspect, well, a lot of these guys don't necessarily have a strong political aspect, or they say they don't for the sake of business. Often they do actually have a strong opinion, and you can kind of read through the lines when you go through all these posts over a year time period or whatever. You'll start to figure that out, and all of that again can be leveraged when you're actually going to go and do an engagement and talk to these guys. So this preparation phase is so important. You can leverage the profile that you did. That's the reason that I do that. And I said it doesn't always, I don't include that in the ransomware diaries, but I do that because I need to use that information for preparing to do my engagement. I'm going to be developing a persona or a sock puppet often to talk to these people. So having that profile helps greatly in doing that and determining the requirements of the needs of that sock puppet. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, as well as determining your goal. I'm going to talk about that here on the next slide, so I'm not going to get too far into that. But the point of this is when you prepare, you do need to determine that goal. You can't create a sock puppet unless you know what the goal of the use of that sock puppet is going to be. And the when and the where, you can't always control this, but I'm just going to give you an example. If I had to choose to talk to a threat actor on an underground Russian forum, or to use Tox, which Tox is just an encrypted communication application. I would choose Tox any day because on a forum, yeah, of course I'm going to use a VPN and things of that nature, but there's going to be logs, there's going to be other evidence that's going to be there, where if that particular target has a relationship with any of the administrators, or if they think that you're a researcher, they could probably easily leverage the administrators to pull information on your account, to look at things. So I try to have my engagements outside of the forums whenever possible. You can't always do that, but again, knowing that information and trying to direct your engagements to where you want it to take place, knowing you always can't, but when you can, trying to do that is relevant. And of course, you have to define success and failure. A lot of folks miss this step, but if you can't go into engagement to know if you actually achieved your goal or failed unless you've defined that. And you have to be able to define that, because a lot of times it's not as black and white as, okay, well, I reached this objective, it was a success, and if I didn't, it was a failure. It's almost never that black and white. So thinking of that before you do your engagement is important, because if you fail, you probably did something wrong in your preparation and planning phase. Okay, so that all of that, defining those success and that failure is part of this goal-driven aspect. And these are just some examples of the things that you might use for creating a sock puppet and for your goal of your engagement. Whether it's information gathering, whether it's gaining access to a forum or to an admin panel. Building rapport is something that I always start with before I try and get any of these other larger objectives. I will almost never go into engagement with the first time I talk to them being where I'm going to try and get this critical piece of information. I know there are researchers out there who do, and perhaps they are better at it than I, or maybe they have some experiences or knowledge that I don't. But from my experience, it pays off to build the rapport first, long before you actually try to get those resources. And that really is done because you have to be credible. And if I just go in and I'm asking, hey, can I get access to your admin panel? Of course they're going to say no. But if they've talked to me, 3 times a week for the past 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to have a much higher level of comfortability with me, and that's going to increase my chances of having success. Also, if you're going to try and manipulate them, or you're going to try to use mis or disinformation to disrupt or to cause problems within their organization, if you don't have that rapport and that credibility, that's not going to work. So anyway, all these are sort of baby steps that lead up to actually reaching your goal. And I'm saying you, but this is what I do when I conduct engagements. These are sort of the steps: is building rapport, gaining their trust, and then I go for my primary objective. Okay, so I don't always use fake personas. I used to 100% of the time use fake personas. I still do use them, but not as high a volume as I previously did. And the reason for that, I'll cover when I get into some of my engagement examples. But when you do human, you're going to always have some sort of a persona that you're using. Creating that is like creating a person. You want to have a believable story. I often will create these sock puppets, and I will give them elements, meaning I'll have accounts, social media, posts, things of that nature that have nothing to do with my actual target or objective. The reason that I do that is because if you create a puppet and the first time that you use it is on the day that you created it, I can almost guarantee you it's going to fail. These need to look like real people. So even if I'm a real person, I probably have some other social media accounts, even if they're not relevant to being on this Russian hacking forum or talking to this bad guy. If I'm a real person, I probably have them. So I build and I develop these things. This is also something that I learned in the 4589 class that I was able to use right away. Is having sort of this documented using this is mind map software, but it's great for sharing when you're on a team and you're going to have multiple people that are going to use this puppet, and you need to maintain sort of the same voice, understand the background, understand the story. And I like that you can click on each of these. Like I could click on the puppet thing and I'd be able to have the story written in there of their background, who they're supposed to be, things of that nature. You can put credentials in this, however you want to do it. But the point is, you want to have something that be shared across a team, because I do most of my stuff myself when it comes to my engagements, but a lot of organizations have teams of people that do. So this is important to make sure that it's accessible and usable. For the Ransomware Diaries, and I want to talk to, let's say, the leader of Ransom VC or Lockbit or Black Cat. I want to have other puppets that can be used to support that primary puppet, and that primary puppet is going to need people who can vouch for him or her, and they're going to need to have sort of supporting elements that talk to people that are important to your target. So it's the more the merrier is kind of what I say. I usually will have one primary, 2 secondary that I use for support. And then I have another puppet that is completely separated, because if any of these first 3 puppets, your primary or your 2 support, get burnt, people might connect the 3 of them together. And if they realize you're a researcher, all of those are out the window, and then you have nothing. So it's important to still have a development puppet that exists, has some history, that has nothing to do with those accounts. Otherwise, like I said, you're back to square one. All right, so this is the fun stuff, at least for me, the threat actor engagements. So this is my first example. Here's the background to this story. I had just written the Ransomware Diaries 1. In the Ransomware Diaries Volume 1, the research that I did was with sock puppets. That's where I tried to become an affiliate with Lockbit. I went through their process. I talked to them on talks. I had hijacked a known account, and because of that, I had people to vouch for me. But I'm not a hacker at the end of the day, and there were some things that gave me away. I still made it a lot farther than I thought I would, but there are things that gave me away. What I did not expect, though, was Lockbit kind of kept me around. I left me in the talks channel. Our conversations continued. We started to grow this relationship, though it wasn't me. It was me, but he did not know it was me. He believed it was like this upcoming hacker that wanted to be a ransomware affiliate. So it allowed me to get a lot of information. But once I wrote the Ransomware Diaries and I put my name and face on it, he knew who I was. He knew the accounts that I had. They had switched one of their accounts on Exploit, it's a Russian hacking forum, to use my face a week after I had published this report. So the message was loud and clear. He knew who I was. Figured if I was at risk anyway, I might as well leverage what I had done and see if I could get him to talk to me. Now, I had expected them when I was going to reach out as myself, I expected them, to tell me to go screw myself, and they weren't going to talk to me. I was wrong. Instead, I reached out and I just said, hey, you know who I am? I just wrote about you in the Ransomware Diaries. Let's just set up a direct line of conversation. Instead of telling me to go screw myself, I got these plus signs. I love you, you best researcher. And the conversation was a lot more, but I'm not in the business of embarrassing threat actors. So I'm not going to do that. But we had a nice exchange, and I needed to build that rapport. So I said to him, this was Lockbit's the leader. I said, hey, tell me your name and address. I'm going to send you a signed copy of my book. Obviously, he laughed and he said, I can't do that. You'd catch me then. So I did the next best thing. I took my book. I wrote him a little note, sort of, again, building rapport was the objective. And even though I'm doing this as myself, there's still all the planning. There's still a goal. It's I don't want to say you're never 100% yourself, but you have to be somebody else even when you are approaching a threat actor as yourself. A lot of times they'll say, just as an example, like either racist jokes or bad things. And if in real life I'd be like, hey man, that's not cool. Like, I'm not going to stick around if you're going to talk like that. Well, that doesn't work when you're doing an engagement and it's for a larger purpose. You just have to change the conversation or keep your mouth shut until the conversation changed and move on. Well, same here. I needed to build this rapport. So showing a picture of me, not hiding who I am, writing a personalized note, providing a book. This seems very minimal, but it's not. This was actually the base that we began our relationship of the real me and Lockbit. And that lasted up until about a month ago, or if you've seen the Ransomware Diaries 5, it's gone south. But the point is that it all starts with these small things to build rapport. And if I hadn't have done that, I don't know where I would be today. All right, so next example. So I was doing research on ransom VC. This example is sort of to exemplify why you need to talk to more than one person. So you don't want to just have one target that you talk to when you're going to do a human engagement. Whenever I do my research for the Ransomware Diaries, I will talk to many people that are involved in the targeted group that I'm researching. And so in this case, I had talked to ransom support, who also has used the name Impotent, his name, not mine. Read the report if you want the backstory. But this person, he would lie a lot. He'd tell me lots of stories. And if I had just gone off of his information, I would only hear his side, and my research would be, it would not be as good as I wanted it to be. So in doing that, I talked to one of his top affiliates, which was a guy named USDOD. USDOD is a well-known wanted hacker. He had been an affiliate working with ransom support. And I didn't go into this work with the idea that I was going to work USDOD to give me this particular piece of information. I went into it with the aspect of, let me talk to him. Obviously, the objective was intelligence gathering, but I didn't know what he was going to tell me. And he ended up giving me the most critical piece of information for that entire report. He gave me information that fit perfectly into the missing puzzle pieces. It lined up with all the timelines. It lined up with everything I didn't know, all the things that I heard, and and it gave me a full picture. And just a quick summary, the information that he gave me was that ransom support had been affiliated with Ragnar Locker before. He claimed, US DoD claimed that ransom support had turned them over in the feds because they had a falling out, and that was revenge. And then further, Ransom Support himself had closed down Ransom VC because he said there were some arrests and he was concerned that law enforcement was getting too close. I had assumed that those arrests were from Ransom VC and that it was a lie because there was nothing reported. In reality, there were Ragnar Locker people that got reported at the exact time frame that this conversation initially took place. So it all fit in perfectly. Point being, if I hadn't talked to additional people involved with this attack, I wouldn't have got that information. So this was an intelligence collection operation, but I was talking to several players, not one, and it paid off. And this is my favorite. I think out of all of them, it probably wasn't my smartest, but the goal here was, I'm calling it an influence operation, but it was kind of to put something out there in the world and see how it would affect Lockbit. So I was getting ready to release the Ransomware Diaries Volume 3. It was called Lockbit Secrets, and I had a bunch of information that the leader of Lockbit did not want made public. And so I wanted to see what would happen if I pretend extorted them. Now, remember, I have a strong relationship with these people. This isn't like I'm doing something and they were gonna come after me. Like I knew them. I had a good relationship. I put this out. I figured they would know it was a joke, but still, I wanted to see how they would react. So I put this out there into the world, and then I trolled the hell out of them beyond this, which I didn't add in here, but it's out there on Twitter if you want to see it. But I did that, and there was something happened that I didn't expect. People actually believed that I had done something with Lockbit. Now, at the same time that I posted this, some other organization, a cybersecurity organization, I believe, I can't prove this, hacked into Lockbit's admin panel. Lockbit, because of the timing, believed that that was me, and Lockbit went dark. He was, at the time, almost always online on Tox 24/7. He went dark for almost 2 weeks. It turns out that he went dark because they were having to go through, clean up, and kick out the accounts and the people that shouldn't have been there. But I started getting messages from affiliates as well as researchers, asking me questions. Some of the affiliates thought that Lockbit was dead or in prison. They wanted to know if I had something to do with it. They thought that I was actually going to de-anonymize him. And this one's my favorite. Has anyone read John DiMaggio's bullshit? I was previously convinced he was a crazy person. Me? But now it turns out it's supposed to be de-anonymized. This is translated from Russian. But this will be, as it turns out, he de-anonymized Lockbit. So my point is, by putting this information out there, it affected their operation from the aspect that they started to question whether or not that they could trust Lockbit, or whether they and him were about to be de-anonymized. All of that there's power and value in. Now, I'm not suggesting you do what I did, or that I would do it this way again, but the point is it had an impact that I wasn't necessarily expecting that did influence the operation, and it did create distrust. When this is done well, it can be used effectively. We just saw the NCA do this, and they did a great job with it. All right, so the takeaway from all of this, obviously, I wanted to talk to you about how I do the Ransomware Diaries, because it's a little bit different than how I previously did research. But building those human relationships, in my opinion, when it comes to ransomware, is critical to being able to tell the whole story and to identify information gaps and to get findings that you would not otherwise get in the data. CTI plus human equals high value intelligence. I truly believe that. And what makes it even better is when you can tell an interesting story with that. More people are going to read it, more people are going to see it, and more of that information is going to get spread. And that's what I've tried to do with the Ransomware Diaries. So I hope that more people will get on board with understanding and seeing the value of human and CTI, because I don't believe that it's something that we should only be left to law enforcement and governments any longer. I truly believe that private sector has the skill, has the resources, and has analysts and researchers that are capable of doing this. And I am seeing a lot more of it today than I was, 5 years ago. But I think it's something that we need to continue to improve on, because when done well, it's extremely effective. At the same time, if you don't know what you're doing, don't just go out there and do it. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble. It is a serious thing, and there are risks and dangers. So you need to be good at it. You need to plan it, and you need to conduct it as a well-planned, organized operation. But all of that is what I do for the Ransomware Diaries. Thank you. And with that, I will take questions.